Today, I wanted to have a brief talk about reconciliation, and specifically the reconciliation of the sales comparison approach. If we are doing a quantitative sales comparison, meaning if we're making adjustments, then the place for similarity, like physical or locational elements of similarity with the subject, the place for that is in the adjustment process. Because what are we doing when we're making adjustments? What is our goal? Well, our goal is to make each sale equivalent to the subject. So if we look at the grid behind me here, what we see is adjustments for lots of different elements. But what we're trying to do is to say, once I have adjusted for design and condition and gross living area and amenities, the difference between the actual sale price and the adjusted sale price means that those elements have already been considered. So the question of which one is weighted most or least or how that's done really needs to be a separate question from those physical locational type elements of comparison, because what we're saying when we have this line that says adjusted sale price of comparables, what we're saying is this is the pricing if this property were equivalent to the subject. If sale number one had instead been the same condition as the subject and had a pool, then it would have sold for its equivalent price would be $594,637. So that is what those adjusted prices mean. So if we go back at that point and say, okay, well, now I'm going to weight these based on which ones were most similar. Well, if we're looking at the adjusted line, those are all the most similar now because we have adjusted them. That's the whole point of the adjustment process. So if we want to do a qualitative reconciliation, then by all means, we need to say, well, which one's the most similar? And I'm looking then not at the adjusted sale price, but the actual sale price. Okay, which one of these is most similar to the subject property? Well, in that case, I might say, well, out of these comps, the first comp would be the most similar before adjustments. Well, so not surprisingly, we would expect that the opinion of market value would be closer to the actual unadjusted sale price of comp one. So we can't conflate uh, the idea of similarity before or after adjustments. We have to deal with similarity after adjustments as what I call transactional similarity, meaning the elements that would be in the category of random. And what I mean is any given property, if it's sold 1,000 times, isn't going to sell for the exact same price. If you put a different mix of people in that transaction, slightly different perspectives, different motivations, those prices are going to change. Well, that variation is the variation that's reflected in the adjusted sales price distribution. So if we look at that as a distribution. So this chart right here is designed to look at the distribution. So all of these are equivalent properties to the subject now. They've been adjusted to achieve exactly that. Now at this point, I don't want to go back and ask myself, well, which one was the most similar and that one needs to be weighted most? They're all identical properties now. They've been adjusted to accomplish that. So now we need to take a look at statistics because now we have a distribution of identical properties. So if we think back to that whole idea of, well, what if this property sold 1,000 times with different humans? Well, what we're doing is we're looking at that distribution as saying, hey, that's theoretically a sampling of what those 1,000 sales would look like. And from that, we can get an idea of the most probable price. Again, we always have to go back to the definition of market value. And what is the primary component of the definition of market value? It's probability. It's the most probable price. So if we look in this graph here, where is most probable price? Well, it's the peak of the probability distribution. And what measures do we use to describe where that peak is located? Well, that's where we talk about mean, median, mode. Mode isn't so great for something like this, although if you lump them together in pricing categories and make a histogram, okay, that can be useful potentially. But mostly what we're looking at is going to be the mean and median. And here I've got a weighted average that I'll talk about some other day. And so this is what market value looks like. This is what the reconciliation needs to look like for properties that have already been adjusted. So again, that's the whole point of quantitative analysis, is to make equivalent properties, take properties that differ and make them equivalent. And so when we talk about what are we weighting then, most or least, it really shouldn't have anything to do with physical characteristics at that point. The weighting should really at this point be considered based on, well, now that we see this distribution, we see this idea of the subject property were to sell again and again, and there's different prices. Well, what price would we expect to come up the most often? And that's where we want to look at, well, the adjusted sales prices that really are most relevant, therefore, are ones that are most consistent with the central tendency of the distribution. So where are they? Are they clustered toward the middle of that distribution or not? And likewise, if there is a sale that was physically similar, but it was more an outlier in your distribution, well, that one should be weighted least because it was not as representative of the definition of market value. So this concept is one that's very seems to be very difficult for just for longtime appraisers, because we're constantly being asked, like, which one's most similar, which one did you weight the most, and those are actually the wrong questions that we're being asked to answer. And unless, I'll make the caveat here, it's actually absolutely the right question to ask if we're not adjusting. If we're doing a qualitative analysis, those are precisely the right questions to ask. But if we are looking at a distribution of adjusted prices, those aren't the right questions. The questions are, which adjusted sales are most consistent with the central tendency of the distribution?